Intro to storyboarding! Hooray! We're doing it. This is week 5. This is class 5. First up, open notes. Okay. Open notes, that's where we like just kind of look at stuff on the internet. And let me just say, this is also open animation, immensely inspired by the amount of information on the internet. Most of these classes are just like things that are taken from books, from the internet, and it's just amalgamation of it. But yeah, at first, let's just look at some Moana storyboards. Why not? And hey, this is something that I did talk about during kind of reviews last night. If you go to Open Animation, our YouTube channel, you know, you can go to in our playlists in our library. We have a playlist called Storyboards, and there's just a bunch of storyboards that we're finding on the internet, and some really cool stuff that, like, yeah, I think like there's a Primal, the Gendy Tartakovsky show. They're like full storyboards, like 20-minute storyboards on here, and just super cool to watch. So yeah, look through them and start looking at storyboards, because I think that they're really fun to just kind of like absorb and learn from. All right.
This next scene is an earlier version of what happened when Moana and Maui first entered the underworld, and they have a much more involved encounter with with an eight-eyed bat. Now in the movie, you see some eight-eyed bats briefly.
A flock of bats, almost.
A flock of bats, but there used to be one bat in particular that they had to
overcome.
Yeah. They had to get past.
Yeah, and these are all deleted scenes, so this is just work. This is how feature, I think, usually works, where it's just like, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that we're never gonna see, and they just had to cut it, and that makes the movie better.
Take this and split up. Follow my lead.
Let's watch another one. One more.
This is a very early scene in the movie where Moana had six older brothers, and there was a canoe race between Moana and her brothers, and this was a showcase for Moana's sailing proficiencies and how she really kind of outdoes her brothers.
We lost the brothers, and we wanted to make her less proficient when she was sailing, so this scene went away, but it's a fun scene.
The scene went away, as did her 6 older brothers, and
they sailed away. Out of
somehow
the
she became an only child, and probably is much happier as an only.
That's the thing that you constantly see with movies. If you like end up going back to deleted scenes, is like, oh, the story was way more complicated. Like, right, Moana had 6 brothers. The movie gets so much better by cutting things and just simplifying down to like, yeah, let's just focus on Moana. Like, we don't need 6 brothers to introduce.
Only child.
Speaking as someone who has 5 sisters.
And speaking of someone who's an only child.
On your left, Dumu!
Go away, this race is boys only.
I see no reason for that. I've already beaten the middles.
Everyone beats the middles, but this time I'm getting Wakaroa.
Not if I get there first!
Ah, look at Wakaroa go! But is that Rongo right behind him? I knew he'd amount to something.
Oh, thanks, Papa Chief. But no, sitting this one out. Had some bad taro.
Then who is...
Moana?
I'm gonna be on that walk-up tomorrow. Nothing's getting in my way.
I know everybody's got different opinions of you know, just animation of movies, but overall, like, the respect for the filmmaking and the clarity of these boards and just how good, yeah, I think just how great these artists are. Like, it's super, super worthwhile to just watch a variety of different storyboards, even if it's not your bag or your favorite thing. Open up that that realm. Start watching anime. Start looking at you know, just simple cartoons. Start looking at, you know, old cartoons. There's 100% something to learn from everything, and the just like poo-pooing on like, oh, screw Disney, screw Pixar, or something like that, or the other route of like, screw anime, which like, yeah, I think when I was going to school there was a bit of that, but now it's like, no, anime is just it's the essential ingredients, I think, of the future of animation. Ultimately, big palette, taking it all. And on that note, the next one I am going to talk about is Alfred Hitchcock storyboards. So Alfred Hitchcock, amazing filmmaker. Every movie was pretty meticulously storyboarded. He could draw really well, but he got really great storyboard artists to also draw. This is a scene from The Birds. What we're going to be talking about today with kind of composition and visual language is applicable to everything in the visual space, right? So character designers, you know, character designer, viz dev artists, all of this is you know, equally sharing this idea of like the visual language. These storyboards, I think, do an amazing job of combining all of the great things that I think visual language can kind of offer. Like, it does use tone, it sets a mood, there's like super great shapes. But yeah, it's just cool to look at these and then to realize that, like, this was the movie. You know, there was a script, there might have been a script, but like, really, you could see the movie here. And that was all planned out. And that's what Hitchcock, I think, did with most of his movies. I'm not sure all, but like, yeah, we'll post this. It's a Hitchcock gallery of just like different storyboards. Like, this is from Psycho. And it's just one drawing. Look at that. It's looking through the peephole. Terrifying. It's just cool to look at, and super, super great uses of just lighting, of value, tone, all this stuff. Worth it to look at for everybody. Okay, next up, this is more storyboard centric. Toby Shelton is an amazing storyboard artist who has just done like an amazing amount of work and just super, super good. But his blog, I think, is really, really helpful. Posts a lot of just his drawings, and it's just really, really great to, hey, see and kind of read maybe a bit of his process. Yeah, to really just like look at these drawings and then to absorb them and then take it into your work. You know, just try to take it into, hey, the simplicity or the kind of how this composition kind of just feels like. You just kind of absorb that stuff, I think, by looking at it. And that's a weird thing in terms of getting better that I do really want to encourage when kind of going over those first storyboard reviews. That first storyboard assignment is like, ooh, do not turn down the idea of like absorption, of like just looking at work and then seeing it, and you do actually absorb it. Like, I think that's how I learn probably the most, is by kind of looking at stuff, actually being pretty conscious of, oh, this is what I'm kind of liking about it. Why is this interesting to me? Just absorbing it without really thinking about it too much. And then you do kind of find yourself growing in spaces when you start to draw. But yeah, the next point being that you need to draw after. It needs to be the practice of storyboards as well, of just like, all right, I kind of now have a better idea of maybe what a professional storyboard looks like. Boom, like, let's give it a try. And that's the weird absorption to practice. Last up, because we're talking about kind of composition today, Hans Boecker, just like this amazing visual artist who has this WordPress, this blog, and it's just filled with work, like filled with his inspirations, just his kind of studies. But really, like, I would super suggest, there's actually like not many books that I'm super kind of like, hey, that was helpful, but I do think that looking through like Hans Boecker's books have been helpful. So he has 2 books. One is Dream Worlds, and it is just kind of about his ideas of like composition, of making an impactful image, and they're super great books. But there's also this blog, right? Like, don't feel like you have to buy the book. It's like, oh, there's secret stuff in here. No, the secret's in the work. And there's also like stuff in the blog where he talks about his process. So yeah, for any visual development people, for people that are just like trying to really make impactful compositions, Hans Boecker's stuff, absolutely amazing to look at. And yeah, like, what was this? Oh yeah, this is an analysis of a background from Bambi, and this is like, oh my gosh, a great artist, a master artist, who's then breaking this stuff down. And I don't know, this is what they're thinking. Let's review. Our job, we're gonna keep kind of saying it, we choose what communicates the story clearly. Our job as storyboard artists, as character designers, like, we're making choices, visual choices, that communicates a story, and that hopefully is doing it clearly. That doesn't mean in a boring way. That doesn't mean in like just a standard, like flat way. I think clarity is this space of what actually has impact on the person, and that's the job of clarity. Is like, ooh, you're trying to get that person to feel, or your audience to feel, you're trying to convey a specific emotion, a specific idea as best as you can, so that it actually hits. And sometimes that's through simplicity, and sometimes that's through complexity. So yeah, we're making choices. We talked about the commandments. That was class 3. And then we talked last week about saviors. So these were kind of just like rules, general kind of rules of storyboarding. Don't cross the 180 things, and look at that class for those. And then last class was just kind of on helpful things that I've found with storyboarding. Like saviors to me for storyboarding. And it was like talking about shorthand, which is just making a complicated drawing simpler, right? So just so that you don't have to draw everything. Asking yourself, what are you trying to say, and what's the most effective way to say it? And yeah, there's kind of guides in there. Again, I suggest looking back at the class, because that's the other part of this. These are videos, and if you get kind of confused on something, maybe you'll be a little bit less confused if you go and watch the thing. You still might be confused, because again, not the greatest teacher. Plan out your scene, so doing these kind of sequence planning things, that can be helpful. Thumbnails, just the idea of your drawings don't need to be final drawings first. Thumbnail it first. This idea of the rule of thirds, which is a composition idea where it's like we look in certain spaces. Using perspective grids to ground your characters. And I would say for a lot of artists who did that last assignment, like practicing grids will be super, super helpful, of just like making backgrounds less scary, of just like grounding your characters and making it feel like a livable world, like a real world. Another one is, when in doubt, lower that perspective line. This is a higher perspective line, but when you lower it, it actually makes like a nicer composition, I think. Music down. Create depth using foreground, midground, background. Boom, 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 boom. Foreground, midground, background. That can really, really up your kind of a composition. Do I need this many shots? So the idea of asking yourself, is there a way to cut down these shots? Like, where can I do this walk in this shot so that I don't need another camera angle? Yeah, I don't need another camera angle where, you know, somebody has to draw this new background and actually it's maybe confusing to the viewer. Just thinking about finding cheats, finding, you know, ways of storyboarding, of doing actions, so that maybe, yeah, there's ways that actually create clarity for the scene, and actually do also make you have to draw less. Like drawing, I cheat all of the time. That's the joy, I think, of let's say cartoon animation is that like a lot of it is trying to find visual cheats so that like I draw less, but also the idea is stronger and clearer. Asking yourself, without dialogue, is the story clear? Today, we're talking about composition in the visual language. So we have kind of gone from, let's take away the frame and just worry about the character and the character kind of acting, right? We've talked about kind of character acting and not worrying about the frame. Then we started to say, hey, there's 3 shots, right? You only need these 3 shots: a medium shot, wide shot, and close up. And we now know that, and the idea of working in and out. Then we learned some basic storyboarding rules of, you know, right screen direction things, and just kind of like how people don't get lost, how to not lose the viewer, and to have the story continue naturally. And then, yeah, last class we just talked about some extra like lifesavers that are super important to storyboarding that make it simpler. But today we're actually going to even simplify it more, because today we're going to just focus on like this individual frame. So we're just going to worry about, I think, 1 frame today. In a lot of ways, it's just worrying about this single image and not the entirety of the story. And that's what maybe we're going to talk about with composition. So, and yeah, I think that this is kind of an important thing of just like the, hey, simplifying it down, practicing on making kind of better compositions, and focusing down on like maybe doing smaller amounts of boards. But then, hey, when you practicing, like that practice will bleed into your story practice to then try to tell the better story. And when you need to kind of storyboard a longer sequence. But yeah, today we're just gonna, I think I'm gonna blabber about some things and kind of draw with you. Like we're kind of drawing together, and kind of gonna do some exercises, I think. Okay, so first thing is everything you see on screen is a choice, right? That's a choice by a character designer, a storyboard artist, a director. These are all visual choices, and this single panel, right? does contain a lot of choices. The composition. What is a composition? It's the organization of visual elements in a scene. So, yeah, I think that one thing that is kind of confusing is that, like, there's a set of tools that we kind of do naturally work with, that we all, you know, if you've taken a painting class, if you've taken a drawing class or something, there's these underlying tools that maybe in some ways don't really get talked about and are naturally, I don't know, just like things that we kind of feel, that we know, that make up an image, but kind of don't realize that they're tools. And that's the visual elements. And so, right, composition is the organization of these visual elements in a scene. What are the visual elements? Bruce Block, who wrote this awesome book, The Visual Story, which is a worthwhile book to look at, that breaks these things down and puts it, it's more composition for film. And this book, I think, is like kind of used at Pixar a lot, you know, as a guide. And yeah, it's just referenced a lot, I think, in the film world. But he breaks down that there are 7 visual elements. The first being shape, line, space, tone, color, movement, rhythm. These seven elements, these 7, almost like, some of them are more ideas than actual like physical things, like what is rhythm, what is movement. That's maybe more of kind of like a feeling rather than an actual tool, like object, like a shape. He says that, right, all compositions use these kind of 7 things. They're the organization of these visual elements. And if you understand these things, and if you start playing with these things and kind of get a relationship with how is shape used in as a visual element? How is line used? How is space used? How is tone used? How is color used? All of these things kind of then can be pushed to make an impactful image, to then clearly show what you want to show and what you want the viewer to feel. We're going to go into each of these, and I think just like talk about them, or just more so like draw them out. Also, there's we'll post these. I found kind of like a cool YouTube breakdown of each of these, of each of Bruce Block's visual language elements, and you know, this guy breaks down each one of them, and I think that they're good videos. Also, Pixar in a box. Hey, again, so much of this stuff that I'm talking about is just like I'm reiterating from stuff that I've seen online. But yeah, we're going to kind of just go into each, and we're just going to do some fun little things that maybe, I don't know, it's maybe more of this feeling. I'm more so gonna be scatting out jazz, baby. And just some feelings of, oh, right, these are what I think about kind of when I think about shape when creating a storyboard. Another point to talk about is the idea of contrast and affinity. These 2 words, contrast and affinity, specifically the idea of contrast, that is a storytelling element that should be found in everything. It's at the story as a whole. You know, if like nothing's happening and there's no contrast, then there is no story, right? There's no conflict, there is no story. It's just a vacant line. That goes for all of these elements. There will be a contrast and an affinity feeling for each. Affinity is, no, they're similar and they're the same. They're similar and they have similar feelings. So thus they're not competing against each other. You know, and that might make for something that's more boring or calm. Whereas these contrasting things, I want to look at that. I can more see the differences and the visual differences between these two things because they're contrasting elements. So yeah, with all of these, we are going to be kind of thinking about using contrast to help your compositions and to use affinity too, where, hey, there are points where you just want calmness. In terms of affinity, I think of like Wes Anderson's work, where there's kind of a lot of, just like in some ways simplicity to it and calmness. Another key term that we're kind of going to be talking about is focal point. We're leading the eye of the audience. They're like eye trackers, and they do that for movies of just like where people are looking. Our job is to kind of be in control of where the eye is looking. So where do you want us to look? And that point is usually the focal point, right? It's that point where, that's where most of the people are probably looking. This is a super cool guide. We put this in the guides from Stu Livingston. Just talking about, finding your focus, finding your focal point. What do we want the audience to look at? And how can we draw the audience into that focal point? Craig is stuck. That should be the focal point, right? A mysterious figure. Our eye is going to be leading here. People are looking over there. There's, contrast here by it being in silhouette. And it's just like, what's this one point that you want us to look at? I like these Yogi Bear breakdowns. I think that these simple comic book panels break down composition into simple, understandable ideas where, hey, this is a nice cartoon. When you break it down, it's just visually pleasing shapes. There's some differences to it. There's contrast. There's just like lines that are kind of leading to a space. And we're not drawing too much attention away with this composition. If this were to be like kind of all over the place in background, that would draw away from Yogi Bear. And just this simple composition is visually interesting. There's like background element, there's a bit of that kind of mid-ground, and it's just like, each of these comic book images, each of these little cartoons can be broken down to these like simple compositions. And I do think a lot of the storyboarding that, let's say, I do more in the TV world is really, really based in what's a clear composition that's visually interesting, that focuses on what we need to focus on story-wise. And let's not overcomplicate it. Let's not make it the most epic shot in the world. Let's just simplify it down where it's about the character. So breaking these down, it's just cool to take a comic book panel, take like, I think especially these simple little comics, and just break them down into shapes. I think that's a really, really good exercise. So, visual elements: space, line, shape, tone, color, movement, rhythm. With storyboards, we aren't really going to use color. So, we might skip out on talking about color. But that's visual development, or, any visual class. Color theory is using these visual elements. But I do think, in general, we're using space, line, shape, tone, movement, the idea of movement and the idea of rhythm. Let's draw. I think we should all just imagine we're like at Woodstock, and just kind of feeling, oh man, there's this box, but how can we make some feeling, man? Where it's like, start drawing some boxes, or, in whatever program you are. And, we're making visual choices using simple shapes, using line, and that creates a composition that can create feelings. Visual jazz, man. And weirdly, this is a lot of what these more complicated drawings, even though this is a simpler thing, end up kind of being, is just like visual jazz. And yeah, I think that maybe let's just jam out a little bit and talk about each one of these. So first up, we're going to talk about space. So what is space, man? This is space. There's so much space here, right? If I put a little dot here, that dot has a lot of space. It's really alone. But it is also like, I'm now looking at it because now there's something that's occupying that space. I know that I'm supposed to look at that. That's maybe like a focal point, right? But let's take up some more space. Like, ooh, whatever this is, that is taking up space. Oh no. Or you know what? I want to do this. Oh no, it's boxed in. This little thing is now boxed in. This space is being constricted. Oh no. We are playing with space right now. And we are also using other elements like line and shape and rhythm and all these things. But first, kind of talking about this idea of we have this blank frame, and you know, you'll hear this of like, the bigger something is in the frame, the more important it is. And I think that that's generally true, where, you know, but there can be things that, right, like something small in the frame, where you might say that the more important thing here is actually, you know, the landscape. But there's also visual interest here, you know, of just like, oh, having something small be here, but you know, maybe there's this mountain to climb. Boom. Yeah, I think that one of the first things that we're gonna do with kind of space is like, don't necessarily think about shape, don't necessarily think about you know, line or everything else. It's just like, let's first play with this thing, like this box, and you have a blank space, and just see what happens when you start filling it in, right? Like, what happens when I divide it? Like, that is a balanced space, and that might feel boring, but that also might feel like that's what I want to feel. I want to feel balance. You know, if we divide it into 4 now, right, that's still balanced. But what happens, you know, when we kind of break up that space? And it's like, oh, there's more contrast here, and then there's affinity here, and I am more like, right, I feel anxious kind of over here. I feel drawn to it, but I might feel a bit anxious. So I would say, hey, let's take a couple minutes. Let's take 5 minutes and just draw some little storyboard panels and just play with that space. Just do different things. I'm gonna do some different things. Not necessarily worrying about or it's like, I weirdly think that, oh my gosh, like, for this feels like space to me. Like, all of this feels like open air. And it actually, for me, it feels like that's relaxing. You know, that's like, this person now has some space to breathe. Yeah, I think that's like a... And this is, man, we're just playing with visual jazz, baby. What happens? Box something in. What happens when you restrict that space? Play with the space. Visual jazz. I'm gonna keep saying that until it becomes real annoying. Oh, I like this idea. Playing with space, where this space is completely occupied. You know, I think of it as like people. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many people crammed into this tiny space. And then this guy's crammed into a tiny space, but he's actually like, has a ton of space to himself. Or herself. Oh, man, it's all feeling. What happens if I start to complicate this? Now I'm kind of not sure what to look at. Like, I'm making spatial decisions. You know, I'm filling in space. But now I've kind of lost what I'm supposed to look at. You know, if I add somebody who's over here, they're not quite as alone, right? And now I don't know who's important. And that's just by weirdly filling in visual space. And again, like, right, we are using line. We are talking about kind of rhythm here. We're talking about shape. You know, we are using shapes, but like first, the first building block is just, hey, every panel you got this blank space, and then if I put somebody here. If I start filling that space, like this is saying something. I'm getting a feeling just off of this. It's like it's symmetrical, you know, like these are equidistant, filling in that space equidistant, yet like I kind of know where to look, right? I don't know, there's like a uniformity, there's like kind of a calmness, but then yeah, this thing feels like it's boxed in. What happens if you make this bigger? Like that breaks up this conformity. And maybe this feels a bit more like boxed in. But I don't know, like I'm less visually interested by that. What happens if I make this really small? I know. Find it kind of feels maybe a bit too complicated, where like this actually felt the space of kind of equidistant kind of felt to me good. Okay. Yeah, I hope that you just drew some weird drawings, played with some shapes, played with space, played with the space. Again, each time you draw one of these blank things, you got a whole bunch of space to play with. You know, you get to decide where, you know, how much you're filling of it and why you're filling, and you know, hey, the thing that takes up more space is probably the thing that has more visual, that is like more important in the scene, you know, that makes this feel imposing, that this is tiny compared to this. Another thing to think about is size, right? It's just big, small. That's space. That's space. Big, small, that's space. You know, big Death Star ship. Versus tiny ship. That's Star Wars. Okay. Next up. We're going. Visual jazz. Line. Let's start playing with some line. What is the first line that we usually have? It's the horizon line. In every image there's... Or no, not in every image there's not a horizon line, but there is a horizon line that exists in kind of every space, right? But the horizon line might be off the page, you know, might be up here, might be down here. But, you know, with most compositions, we are putting the horizon line in this space. And then now let's think about focal point, right? And that idea of, oh, we have a space that maybe we want the viewer to look at, and that's maybe our character. Right? And like, let's say this line is in the middle, right? This line is cutting kind of right on this person's kind of head or this circle. Like, this line is maybe a bit weird, right? Where it's conflicting. But, you know, let's lower this line, or let's higher, you know, let's make this line higher, and maybe this is visually interesting. But like, what's another thing that we can do to help the composition of this? And I would say that it's lines that lead, right? It's let's put some backgrounds, you know, let's put some visual elements that might help. Like, we're putting lines that are pointing to where we want to look. That's one idea of how to use line, and how line is kind of used in compositions. You know, if I start to break this up, and just start putting lines, like, I now kind of don't know where to look. I think that there's still enough like visual things that indicate maybe where to look, but like, yeah, I think that one of the really cool things about line work are lines that lead. And here's some good examples of just like that being seen in film. If you break down a ton of these images, if you just kind of stop a movie, or hey, any like comic book panel or whatever, like there are lines that kind of are drawing you to certain spaces and make it just easier for your eye to kind of know where to focus, and that tells kind of the story, that helps tell the story. And these are just lines that are everywhere in everything. And the weird part about it for us is that we draw those lines, we put those lines in here. But you know, this person who chose this shot, you know, was able to manipulate and kind of choose a camera angle that had lines that led to the characters, and they placed the characters in a certain space where the lines are kind of converging. And so these are all kind of choices. But one weird thing with drawing is that, you know, we might yeah, we are literally drawing lines that lead to some of these visual elements, or that maybe distract from the visual elements. Maybe that's something you want. Yeah, these just shadow lines here in this shot, I think this is from Lincoln. Yeah, they help to direct the eye, and these rays of light help direct the eye to, well, here's our visual focus. So let's play with some of that. Let's play with lines that lead, and using lines to either, hey, we might distract from a composition, but yeah, I think that let's create a focal point, or, you know, like, we don't need characters, they can just be things, and then let's create some lines that kind of, using lines that might draw us into this space. Let's visual jazz it. Yeah, let's take 5 minutes and just kind of play with the line. And yeah, just think about contrast, where it's like, hey, what happens if you put a line kind of repeat it due to an image? Contrast and affinity, right? Play with the line. Lines that lead. Play with lines. Contrast, affinity. Contrast. This creates a contrasting shape. But okay, here's another element of line that we do need to talk about. Is the idea of what else can we control about line? We can control the thinness and the thickness of it, right? Of like, this is more demanding, this is more timid, right? The shakiness of this line, right? You know, the amount of like visual information that is now here is complex, right? We're because of the line. Whereas this is more calming, you know? where, yeah, this might be more detail. So that's another space to play with when thinking about line. But yeah, basically just like thicker lines will create more visual dominance, right? And we all know that. And then thinner lines will be less imposing. All right, we gotta keep it going. Now we're talking shape. Let's play with some shapes. What do we know about shapes? We know that, yes, I do think that this is true, is that there is something real about like kind of shape language of that, like, hey, these basic shapes have different feelings. Like, this is a sense of, I think, like, of fluidity, of just like, in some ways of like calm, of movement. This one is like grounded, of simplicity, of normalcy, and this one's sharp, right? This one's a bit more, can actually feel like that's intimidating. And that is a weird thing where it's like, if I'm just playing with shapes, a triangle is like the first thing that comes to mind when I'm like, oh, that's scary. And then it's like, oh, just drawing this. I'm just drawing these two, just drawing this box and this little circle. And it's like, oh man, that triangle is terrifying. Here we're just kind of on a box. A box on a box. Yeah, I would suggest just playing around with shapes now. And you know, you have triangles, circles, and squares, and trying to get different feelings based on these different shapes. And you know, like, what does this kind of idea of like a rectangle, what does this do? This shape does frame an image for me. You know, it frames something to look at. It puts them in a box. And boxes are super important and super used in compositions. Here's kind of going through, like, this is a great example of where kind of boxes are used in shapes, where it's like you have this framing device of just this window plane. Just the uniformity of this, and then these shapes are big and are the most important thing. This shape is small and it's less important. Let's kind of see some shapes here. Oh right, like, just even in character design, right? Mr. Incredible is just kind of more of this broad shape that, you know, I think is a grounded. It's a rectangle. It's a square. His shoulders are squared, and that's a sense of like solidness. But you know, like, you have these two kind of small shapes of just like, oh my god, Violet's just so thin, and yeah, just like that these are kind of contrasting things. You have this like this thin to this thick, and this thing can break at any point, and this thing is like solid. You can't move that. That's a weird shape thing. And then here's another shape of just like, we're creating shapes in terms of these compositions. Like, there's this shape frames this head, and then we have this line that leads oh yeah, that's the fun thing, right? Is like, take a bunch of screenshots of movies and then that cool conspiracy theory kind of put that conspiracy theory brain on, and it's like you could do this with your own images and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a freaking genius, of like, oh, all of these are choices, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't, where, you know, some of these might just be like, yeah, that's just naturally how I was thinking, was this big old shape, like, is this big thing that is staring over this thing, like that there's kind of and then that there's like focal points, there's, you know, this is kind of hitting the rule of thirds, and that all of this space is framing this character. It's fun to do this with just like screenshots of any image and just try to be that weird conspiracy theorist who's doing the like what is that, the circle thing, yeah, that thing, you know, I should know the name of it. What's the name of it? You know, that thing, the circle thing, and then you put a square in it, blah blah blah. Fibonacci sequence, boom. But yeah, you're kind of making that stuff. Like, I think that is a fun game to play when thinking about composition. You are this master, you are this like choice maker of this single image, and you really want to draw the attention to what you want. You want to create the feeling that you want. Yeah, and that's what we're doing. We're playing with it. Oh, here's some other shape things. I was just like, right, playing with shapes, playing with space, playing with line. So right, we've talked about shape, we've talked about line, and we've talked about space. And I would say that personally, yeah, like I think that those are kind of the important building blocks. That's what we were really playing with. And that's the stuff that, like, boy howdy, you don't even realize it maybe when you're drawing, but you are playing with these things and making conscious decisions to use shapes certain ways and to take up space certain ways, and like strong images that have visual impact, use these things to their advantage. So shape, space, line. What's next? We have tone. And so with storyboards, right, usually they are just line drawings, right? We're not really using tone. We're not using a sense of value, of light to dark. But there are times, and there are storyboards where it's like, no, we need to use tone. We need to use value. We need to use that tool to draw attention and to help tell this story, to get the viewer to feel what we want. A place of high contrast is going to draw the viewer's eye. So this space of this light and dark, this contrasting point where this dark meets this light, automatically, like, our eye is going to go there. Our eye is going to go there, and that creates. This is another, right? You're creating shape through contrast of tone. And so, yeah, this is the basics of what I think about in terms of tone. I normally go with, like, right, the you want to create contrast of tone, but, like, generally I think that the thing that has the most visual importance is usually, or yeah, like, I would color this the darkest, right? And maybe even since this is maybe a bit more in the foreground, like I would even do this a bit more. And then like as you recede further back, the tone might get more affinite of just like it's more similar to this white. Yeah, maybe there's this. And like maybe these background. I can't see that. But yeah, I think that just when using tone, right, you're looking at contrast. Generally with storyboards for me, it's like foreground stuff. I color, or I have the tone kind of being darker because that's usually the most visually important thing. But hey, there might be this space of contrast that you really, really want to build up of this light to dark. But yeah, using tone in your storyboards with your shapes, with your line, with your like, can be really, really effective in terms of helping your composition. So let's play around with tone, and you can just do that with your pencil, of just like, hey, coloring harder, coloring, you know, lighter, right? But yeah, I'm kind of just gonna do shapes. And then fill in with tone. Play with tone. Yep. Huh? Oh, cool. Thanks. contrast. Let's look through. I want to look through some stuff. Yes. 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 Like, just doing a ton of these, like, I'm telling you that these actually will really help you understand space, understand kind of perspective better, understand just images, and just like, yeah, that really, really helps storyboarding. These are basically, right, these are thumbnails. These are you're just putting shapes down that tell the story. You're occupying space that tells a story. Yes. Lines. And just loosen up. Visual jazz. Have some fun. Do some overlap, right? Like, overlap shapes. See what happens. Because that can create depth. Cool. Yes, keep doing these. These are like super good composition helpers, right? Of just like, this is, I think, probably the most important thing for just getting comfortable with storyboarding, is learning kind of these basic things and playing with these, yeah, just these like basic tools that we end up complicating. But just doing these little exercises can really, really help make your storyboards way, way easier. Cool. Yeah, this one's great. Awesome. Focal points. Awesome. Yes. Values. Value. Yes. Yes. These contrasting space. And this, yeah, this value change just draws our visual interest. Cool. Awesome. Visual interest through value, or through tone. Awesome. Okay, let's keep moving. Now, these next things that we're going to talk about, like, maybe are more conceptual, right? It's this idea of movement, and we've kind of like you already kind of know movement, with kind of some things that we've been talking about, and like one of those things is line of action, right? Where like having a line of action can really like just help your drawing just to create some sense of movement, right? Yeah, like line of action is that first bit of like movement that we have kind of in most of our storyboards. But then that movement does kind of extend to, right, the composition. It's not just the line of action of necessarily not necessarily just the character, but what about like the lines, the movement of you know, the background itself. And you know, I think that this leads into, you know, these ideas of leads into these ideas of, well, right, lines that lead, there's movement in the line, and like these background these background lines do create a sense of movement for the eye to point to where we want to visually look. Line is very much a part of that, but then there's also, right, like the actual movement in a composition, and like this element that we have with storyboarding can move. And you can go from that being a really, really small element to it being a big element, right? Taking up a bunch of space, and it being imposing. Yeah, and that's another space of movement that does, I think, happen, that does get talked about when talking about visual language, is these shapes, these spaces, they move. How can we use that to our advantage? If something is moving, our eye is automatically like, it's a contrast, right? That thing is moving, everything's staying the same. Our eye is going to be fixed to the thing that's moving, right? That's just another thing to think about when going into your storyboards, of like, just how can we use movement to our advantage? Maybe can we move this character from something that's like less imposing to something that's more imposing? Also, just in terms of movement too, like, yeah, it is in the line. It is in the, like, let's create a sense of energy of like, oh, this stuff is moving. And that could just be in the sense of like, right, the kind of this kind of being angled a bit, and like just the roughness, or like the energy of this line, that can create a sense of movement too. And kind of just like the angle of maybe this composition, there's maybe a sense of movement. So yeah, that can be very much also just in your line work. There's a sense of movement in your compositions, being able to move shapes so that they have different meanings. You know, they can go from something that's like less imposing to just more imposing. So movement is another kind of like jazzy type feeling and concept, and just using motion in your composition is something that, like, it's hard to maybe put into words, but just through this practice of doing these kind of quick little composition things, you know, if you say, hey, let's create a sense of movement in this composition, like, go, let's do it. Let's spend 5 minutes trying to create a sense of movement in our composition. right? Or this one, it's just like a lack of movement, right? Or just kind of visually center, and just everything is creating a space of there is no movement. There's just sitting. Cool. Let's look at some movement. Yes. Movement. There's movement. Things are moving. Yeah, you can use these visual, like you can use line, you can even use tone, you can use, yeah, you can use all of these visual elements to create a sense of movement. And that can really, really help your image. That can really, really help, right, like, create that feeling that you might want the viewer to feel. There's a sense of movement here. There's a sense of movement here. Yes. Move. Of motion. All right. Let's look at White Server. Cool. Yeah. These lines, this is creating a sense of like I'm moving into this. I'm moving. My eye is moving towards what you want me to move towards. Cool. Yes. 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 Movement. These lines are directing me and creating a sense of like, oh right. I visually want to move my eyes to this space. Yes. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, last one. We're gonna talk about, it's maybe very similar, but right. It's rhythm. Rhythm mainly talked about in music, right? But it's super prevalent in the visual space too. And that rhythm, right? Like if we start doing this, right? This is an even rhythm, right? Don't. But let's move these closer. And then this one maybe further out, and then like let's put this one over here. So this kind of rhythm is like, ooh, we've got these two lines that are closer together. Dum 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 dum. And there's like a rhythm to this kind of composition, right? Whereas if we go back, this is a consistent rhythm, right? We're going dum 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 dum. And there, yeah, like our eye is actually creating a sense of and maybe the space of these images is creating that sense of rhythm. And then I think another way to think about rhythm is, okay, so one is like the rhythm kind of can be repeating elements. Hey, if there's chaos, visual jazz, and then boom. Like, that's a sense of rhythm. Like, there's a sense of rhythm in this image, which is super weird, and it's musical. Visual jazz, I think probably rhythm. That if there's any point where like this that saying is gonna work, it's probably here. Boom. And then let's kill this composition. Wah, wah, wah. And like, now this is, oh man, you're just adding uniformity, and now it kind of just kills the composition. It kills the fun, kills the jazz. But maybe that's what we want. You know, maybe we want people to feel that consistent sense of rhythm. That uniformity. That's a rhythm too. Oh right. Hey, somebody's mentioning like Dutch angles, and us being introduced to the idea of, yeah, we have a horizon line, and then what happens if we kind of rotate the camera? That's usually called a Dutch angle, where it's like the horizon line is slightly off, and creating that sense of angle, and usually that's just creating a sense of movement, where this person is moving, it's actually moving up the hill, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it's harder to run this way, but it would be faster, like going this way, but him running this way would be faster, right? Like it's going downhill. You'll hear in film a good amount is like Dutch angle, which is, yeah, just adding some angle to your composition, so that it can create this sense of movement using these visual language things. Going back to rhythm, let's kind of combine all of these things, and really, when thinking about rhythm, when thinking about line, when thinking about movement, when thinking about tone, shape, yeah, and space, let's combine it all kind of in a space of rhythm and play some visual jazz. Last time, 5 minutes of visual jazz. I don't care if there's any copyright. I'm playing jazz. You don't believe in I do well, like salads and scrambled eggs. That's the Frasier song. This is more light jazz. This is more of a cocktail-y jazz. Huh? Nah, man, I want some like ba 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 ba. But yeah, this is maybe if I'm drawing this kind of feeling, maybe a bit of like, ooh. I think that this is, wow, this two butt, it's a butt. I'm making a butt. Yeah, really, hey, for people that are just doing this exercise kind of for the first time too, like start overlapping shapes. So the idea of, hey, this is a shape, and then let's put a line here, and then something's in the background, and then let's create this curve, and then hey, let's maybe put something else kind of in the creating a sense of depth. Yeah, like overlapping shapes I think is super helpful for people who are just starting to board, is doing this exercise and starting to play with overlap. Okay. Sense of rhythm. Jazz, baby. Da 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 da. Ba da ba ba ba. Do 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 do. All right, more. I want some hard jazz. Give it up for DJ Quads.
Can I please have your attention?
Ah.
I've just handed an urgent and horrifying news story. I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Do 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 da do 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 da 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 da. Ding dong, bop 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 bop.
It's made with bits of real panther, so you know it's good. It's quite pungent. It stings. In a good way. It smells like pure gasoline. 60% of the time, it works. Every time.
I have a couple voice credits to my name. I do a lot of the scratch dialogue. So like, hey, for Star, I would have to do that all the time, where it's just like before it becomes Star, it's just me saying a dumb line in my voice, and it all looks really weird. I think I did a okay Marco, because it was just like whenever it would be a Marco, it'd be like a more neurotic Marco. Boo-da-ba-bop. Yep. Yep, 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 yep. Yep, 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 yep. Yep, 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 yep. This is so dumb. Rhythm, everybody, we're doing it. You know what? I'm gonna require people to do this. Okay, this is let's do one where it's called visual ski bop. Right now, let's just spend 2 minutes doing a visual ski bop. You have to audibly make noise and then draw to that noise. So ring, ring, dong. Cool. That was my visual ski bop, and that's what I came out with. So just start visually ski bopping and see what comes out. Or if you actually make a noise like da 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 da, ding ding, do do do. I like that. Like, that's a freaking weird composition. Wing. I don't care. This is visual jazz. I'm all for it. Dun 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 dun. Ah! Dun 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 dun. Oh. I love it. This is dumb. I know that this is like, this looks and it's like, wait, this guy's supposed to be teaching us storyboard and whatever. I do firmly believe that, like, okay, that storytelling gut, that art gut that I think we all have, a lot of this does boil down to like just feeling. That's very, very real. Turn off some of the brain and just go back down to feeling. And like, I think that actually gets you to have more fun, to make more work. And I actually think it's a really, really good guide. The whole point is to get the audience to feel something, right? Of telling stories. I think that word feeling, it needs to be in your character designs. It needs to be in, you know, these compositions. And it needs to be in this ski bop. This ski bop. Da da da. Dear. Whoop. I love it. I'm gonna get that tattooed on my body right now. I hope that this was fun. Just going through again, you have these visual elements, and we didn't even talk about color. My goodness, what the heck is color? Color is another visual element that is like this whole other, oh my god, this beautiful thing that you get to use to create feelings. But it can sometimes be boiled down to like, ooh, darkness. That feels blue. That feels dark. You know, that oh, if I'm sad, that feels right. That feels blue. But maybe blue is also, you know, like a cool color. Maybe it's calming. And then blah, yellow. That's a feeling. That is energy. That is happiness. That is movement. And these all kind of just work together. And that is a super, super weird, cool thing that we witness on the day-to-day, but we kind of just don't end up like reveling in. Quickly, so just expanding on these things, right, we do have the saviors that we've talked about that can also help composition. So this idea of the rule of thirds, where there's these natural points that our eye is gravitated towards, and it's just like, oh, it's where these thirds intersect, so it's these points. You can use that to your advantage. Another savior is putting foreground information. So there's foreground, midground, and then background information. And using that kind of that hierarchy of almost like visual importance to create depth, like that really, really helps your compositions, is foreground, midground, like all this stuff, background. That can do wonders for your shots. And I would really suggest for the upcoming assignment for you to play around with that idea of foreground space, midground space, background space. Foreground, midground, background. And then we talked about using grids to ground your character, to say that there's a ground plane, but then what happens when you lower that horizon line? I think that it actually creates this, if we're breaking it down now, it's like this, there's not that much space up here, and so I'm kind of don't know where to look, right? But here, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much space, and it's leading my eye. It's making it so much easier by just lowering this line and creating more space. Using lines that lead, that goes with kind of grids, but use lines, use your grids, use your stuff to help lead the eye. Just quickly, no-nos of composition. Don't crowd the frame. Don't put a bunch of shit in there because I will have no idea what to look at. Unless that's the point, is like, you're not supposed to know what you're looking at. You're just supposed to feel crowded, and verklempt is coming to mind. I don't know why. Don't have just distracting elements for the sake of distracting elements. Like a guy just popping up in the middle of nowhere, you know, a bunch of stuff moving in the background. I don't know what to focus on. Hey, if that's a bit of the point, that's fun. But if you want me to focus on this character, like, let me focus on this character. If you want me to focus on the TV, maybe this character should be looking at the TV, right? Like we should be leading the eye then. Everybody can just be watching the TV. And then it's like, oh, okay. Now we kind of know where we're supposed to be looking. Not giving enough space for action, so this is also crowding the frame. You're cutting off people's, like, you're cutting off people's heads here, and just for some reason you're crowding this space, when it's just like, man, it would be really nice to just have the character be able to be there. I saw this a lot with like, hey, if somebody had a monster, they would put like the monster here, and you would cut off the head, and then that, but like that's pretty cool, and I get that feeling of like making it feel like really big, but like this can equally be something that's impactful, where you get to see the full monster rather than this kind of mess. Theater staging. The last no-no is just kind of like, hey, this visual monotony. And again, hey, this works. This also works really, really well for certain things. Like, again, if you look at Wes Anderson stuff, there's a lot of kind of flat staging that's really, really visually charming. And it makes it so that we kind of focused on the things that he wants us to focus on, or creating that sense of feeling that he wants. But one way to break that up of flat theater staging is to use angles. Using shapes, using angles to your advantage is amazing. So this is just a guide for this whole thing, the composition guide. You have these visual elements: space, line, shape, tone, color, movement, rhythm. And it's your job to use those visual elements and to arrange them and to use them to compose an image, right? Going back to the definition of composition, the organization of visual elements in a scene. So you're organizing these things to help your composition create the visual that you want the viewer to experience. Saviors of composition: rule of thirds, foreground, midground, background, use of grids and lower perspective, no-nos of compositions, crowding the frame, distracting elements, not leaving enough space, flat staging. Woo! That's it. But really, hey, biggest thing to take away from this class: visual jazz. What's the day? Jazz. Visual jazz. Visual jazz. Really, these things, like starting with just a blank frame and just like building on top of it, building shapes, is immensely important, I think, to everything, to whatever you're doing, whether or not it's character design or animation or all of it. So going to our assignment, and this is, I think, pretty friendly to the people who are doing viz dev and stuff like that. I think that this is a great portfolio piece. Is we're taking this assignment that John Navarez, who's an amazing board artist and amazing visual designer, that I saw him do, and it's breaking a fairy tale down into basically 5 drawings, 5 beat boards. So they would still be, they would still be this format, 1920 by 1080, right? They would still be this. Don't think like, oh, right, let me do a vertical. No, keep it as a frame. But what we're gonna do is do 5 drawings of your kind of favorite fairy tale that sums up the whole story. So it's really basically you're making a fairy tale book, right, of 5 drawings. Let's focus on these compositions, right? Like we're trying to tell the story point that we probably know. So let's say for this case, and actually I'm gonna look through that. John Navarez had his example, and his class, they had to do 20 boards, but we're just going to do 5. We're simplifying it down. This is just his assignment of, these are beat boards. So these are using a bit more tone, using a bit more of like just thinking about the visual elements and creating these main beats of the story, that it's like, right, grandma gives a pie, she takes the pie, goodbye, these are the main beats of the story. And John had 20 drawings. Oh no, something's watching her, it's a wolf, she feels like there's something watching her, right, runs into a woodsman, I'm going to grandma's house, wolf has an idea. grandma's house. Wolf, this is imposing. This is an imposing shape, imposing image, triangles galore, and using tone to help sell that. Oh no, tone. Yeah, kind of a sense of peacefulness. Oh dear. Oh no. Mystery. Oh no. Who are you? Ah! Ah! Bam. Buh. Cool. Last image. But we're gonna try to do this into 5 images. So take a fairy tale, whether it's a Jack the Beanstalk, whatever story you want. Hey, heck, it could be I just want to say Blue's Clues. I don't know, there's not really a story to Blue's Clues, but you can make it up. Or Star Wars. You know, hey, if you could condense a Star Wars into 5 images, cool. But just create some beat boards of an existing story, and then that's we just want 5 of them, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the assignment. 5 beat boards of a fairy tale. Take your favorite fairy tale and draw 5 beat boards that tell the story from beginning to end. And this term beat boards, you might hear, is just like, hey, it's a storyboard, but it's comprising the main beat of the story. And it's maybe a bit more of a detailed drawing. There's maybe a bit more thought into just telling the story in a single image, but that's really what these images are. You're trying to tell the story in a single image. 5 of them that go through the from beginning to end, the story of a fairy tale. I think it's a great assignment. Thanks, John. I've never met you, but I'm sorry for just biting it. Cool, that's the class. Okay, bye everybody. Thank you.